What is awakening? In my opinion, to discuss anything of importance, it's important to begin by stating the purpose of the communication. What is the context and purpose of what you're saying? So the purpose of what I'm saying is not informational. I'm not trying to give somebody a definition of what awakening is or what enlightenment is, because that's not helpful. My purpose actually is to give you a sense of why you might want to orient to the possibility of your own awakening, of deepening your own insight into who and what you are, or what the nature of reality is, or what the nature of suffering is. So the purpose of this really is just to point you back to yourself and to point out that there's a possibility that you're carrying around with you at all times, whether you realize it or not. It's been there your whole life. So I'll start by just asking a few questions. Have you ever, or do you now, perceive that there's just something that doesn't feel right about life? Even if you're too afraid to address this truth, even if it's not something you talk about to others or yourself, do you feel like there's something fundamentally not right about the way you are experiencing life? Do you feel left out? Do you feel fundamentally different? Do you feel like you really just don't get how people fit in with one another? Do you feel like no matter what you do, there's some background suffering that you just can't get to or don't know how to address? Do you feel like the usual ways that we interact with one another are somewhat superficial or maybe inauthentic? Do you feel like it's very difficult to play the small talk game or to pretend that there's not something extremely uncomfortable going on inside when interacting with other people at various times? So if interacting with other people feels wholly inauthentic to you, if you feel some background suffering that may have started in early teens, maybe even late childhood, and has just built into adulthood, and don't realize there's a way to directly address that, that's the whole point of this video, that there is a way to address that. Now, the next thing I have to tell you is important, and that is the way that you address this is not the usual ways you've learned to move through life. It's not about learning something. It's not about trying to make yourself feel better through some strategy, some practice, even through meditation. That's not what I'm talking about. All of those things have their value. It's not about healing something. It's not about therapy. Again, all of those modalities have their place. What I'm talking about is fundamentally different than those other ways that we perceive shifting and changing how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and the habits we have. Again, there's nothing wrong with any of those motivations. I just want to be very clear that what I'm talking about is not about any of that. If it were, you would have already figured it out probably. Or someone would have packaged it up and made it extremely simple to completely end our suffering, to end the discomfort of being human, to end the fear that we have that's pervasive in our experience, the fear of ourselves, the fear of life, the fear of emotions, the fear of thoughts, right? If there were a simple way in the matrix of usual human communication and changing behaviors and changing habits and thinking differently, if there were a way to truly end suffering, it would be very obvious by now, I would think, because everyone would want that. So then why is this so hidden, this that I'm talking about? If it's possible to utilize this possibility that I'm pointing to here, then why isn't this so well known? Why isn't this so widespread? Well, it's becoming more well known and more widespread, although there is a very important reason why it's not so obvious, not so well known. It's sort of hidden in plain sight. And just like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that the possibility for awakening is something in you. It's not a learning, it's not informational, it's something you're carrying around with you. Also, the reason it's hidden in plain sight for all of us, until it's not, is also something about you, right? That's important to understand. Now, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not saying there's something fundamentally wrong with you. There's not. I'm also not saying that you're purposely hiding it from yourself, because you're not. There's something about the way our mind and thoughts function that actually obscure this possibility in an ongoing way. They obscure it to the point where you can even hear somebody talk about it. You might be hearing me talk about this for the first time, and still it seems like I'm talking about something in the usual way we talk about things, some information, some thing I'm trying to teach you, right? That's the mechanism of self-defense of the mind that takes everything and turns it into more of the same. That's what you could say thought does, what the mind does. Now, I don't have a problem with thought, and I don't have a problem with the mind. They have a lot of value in the relative world. But when it comes to this that we're talking about, addressing the fundamental issue of suffering, they're just the wrong tool for the job. And not only are they the wrong tool for the job, they actually are a hindrance until we use certain techniques, certain approaches, and most importantly, just have the intention to see through them. So there is this sort of built-in defense mechanism that makes it kind of hard to hear this message, strangely. Now, I can tell you through experience, having stated this message many times in many different ways, and even worked with people who have gone through awakening, who have gone through the barriers of identity structure and beyond, I can tell you that it's possible for anyone. But what often happens is the first time you come in contact with it, it either A, doesn't make any sense, and your mind just overlooks it because it doesn't seem interesting or useful or practical to the thinking mind, or B, you have a fear response. That's not uncommon either. Something just feels scary suddenly. Something feels terrifying when you start to see outside of the usual paradigm of what you feel like the boundaries of who or what you are the boundaries of that. When you see outside of that, suddenly there can be this feeling of like disorientation or the ground coming out from under you, or just a fear response. That's also completely okay. So what often happens is one of those two responses happen, or those reactions to first coming into contact with this information or this pointing. Now, what also happens sometimes is you think you understand it. You have been exposed to this. You know about, say, Buddhism or awakening or Advaita. You have been exposed, but you still are kind of clinging to a conceptual identity. Still feels like someone in there who's going to do something to make something happen and get things the way they want them. Yeah, that's the kind of seeking mind. So that can actually go on for a while as well before you really get a true direct experience of what we're pointing to here. So any of those things can happen, and early on it's pretty common that the first experience you get, the first taste you get of this possibility is either overlooked or you have a fear response to it. Now, what's interesting is this doesn't always happen with a talk about awakening or a talk about enlightenment or Kensho or Zen Buddhism or anything. What often happens is there's a random experience, often when you feel deeply or profoundly connected to another person or to nature, or through the use of a psychedelic substance, you have a very profound, dramatic, and in contrast to the way you usually experience reality, taste. And that can also be either terrifying, confusing, etc. So what often happens is early on you get some sort of response along those lines. And then later, in a very natural and organic way, not even something you realize is happening, you suddenly become interested in a different way. You pick up, the book again, whether it's The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, or another spiritual book that someone handed you, or maybe my book, or you go back and watch a video by the same non-duality teacher, or whatever it is. And then it feels a little different. It looks a little different. You can feel the flavor of it. So it's okay if you have an initial exposure to this, taste something here in this message, and it just doesn't feel like the right time. It causes a little bit of fear. Any of that's fine. It's okay. There's a timing to all this as well. Come back in a few months, maybe. Come back in a year. Who knows? Now, on the other hand, sometimes someone will hear this message and they go, oh, that? I know what you're talking about, but I've been avoiding it. I've heard this more times than I can tell you. Oh, I've always known that was there, but I thought I wasn't supposed to go there, right? You're literally taught not to go there. You're literally taught to avoid this kind of letting go that I'm talking about. but it's there. It's a possibility for you. And you're taught because the majority of people are afraid of it. And the majority of communication makes assumptions that what is important to us is exactly not this. It's actually looking in the other direction, projecting an image of yourself, inauthenticity, seeking, materialism, whatever you want to say. So you may hear this message and suddenly something opens. You feel it. Whoa. Oh, that? I can go there. I can look there. I can let go into that. Of course you can. That's what this message is about. It's the one place your mind doesn't know how to look because it's beyond your mind. It's fundamental to thoughts. It's fundamental to anything you've ever learned about yourself. So it's the most fundamental experience of identity that I'm pointing to, or being. That fundamental sense of being that is completely uncaused. It's not locatable in some specific place because it's everywhere. It's above and below, it's in front and behind, it's inside and outside. It has no specific quality, so it can accommodate any quality. It has no specific color, so it accommodates every color. It has no specific sound, so it accommodates all sound in silence. It has no specific texture or sensation, so it contains all textures and sensations. And even there's no distinction between textures, sounds, thoughts, emotions. So no distinctions at all. There are no distinctions. If you can find this place in yourself right now, which isn't somewhere else, it's right where you are, that has no distinctions, that's what we're talking about. Awakening is when you give yourself to that. So when you first learn about awakening, the next step is to forget about awakening as an event and learn to just give yourself to this presence. But drop the label presence, drop the label awakening, drop all the labels, drop all the positions, drop all the grasping, drop all the avoiding of everything, including thoughts. That's the whole point. So yes, awakening is a possibility, but the way you realize that possibility is forgetting about awakening, forgetting about getting somewhere, forgetting about getting anywhere, and just fully giving yourself to this that's always been here. Always. You've been looking out from it the whole time. So just stop looking out. Stop looking for something. Stop trying to get somewhere. And you'll realize what it is in a very, very direct way, in a way that's so direct you can't talk about it. So you have to go inward beyond your own concepts, beyond your own self-monitoring, beyond your own ability to describe what's happening. You don't need to describe anything to anyone, including yourself. When you describe something to yourself internally, you're kind of lying to yourself. You're making up a self that you're talking to. That's the thought self. And the thought self is just like any other thought. It's just a movement in mind. This that we're talking about doesn't move in that way. It's already everywhere. It has nowhere it can go. It has nowhere to be. It doesn't need to get somewhere. It doesn't need to resolve anything. Can you feel into this? If you can feel into this and are interested in going there, I have good news for you. This is the first step in getting to the end of personal struggle, personal suffering, and the illusion of feeling separate from everything.